So we're going to create an assembly of the four components of the V block. Assembly is obviously really important so that we can make engineering drawings, we can make exploded views, but also super important for later on creating our render. So to create the assembly, I've started up a new assembly file. I go to place and I'm going to select the four files. And you'll notice I've saved the files as parts with version number, so PRT with a wee version number. It's good for keeping your files nice and organised, and I've got them in their own folder as well. So holding down the shift key, I can select all four items, say open, and just dump them into the assembly. Hit escape, because I only need these four. Now, there are many ways of doing assemblies. There are many incorrect ways of doing assemblies, but there's only one really clever and proper way to assembling files. The wrong way would be just to take one of your files or one of your parts and ground it and then start assembling things to it. That's a really bad way of doing things, because it can make life so much more difficult later on. What we want to do is we want to get this in the sort of right face, or the right face in the right way that we want this to be for engineering drawings and so on. Now, you'll notice that I've got my block just here, and I'm going to say this is a main component, and I want this to be the front face. But you'll notice right now it's saying it's on the left hand side, and really I want it to be facing round the right way. So to do that, assemblies have their own work planes. They also have their own axes, and they also have their own center point. And if I was to just press the plus sign on the name of a part, you'll notice they have their own work planes, axes and center point. These are what we use to model the component in the first place. What we're essentially going to do is I want to say that this plane here on the part, so it's the YZ plane on this part, I want it to be in line with this plane here, which is on the assembly. So this will essentially take the part and rotate it. So if I say constrain and line it up, that's it aligned. Now you may well notice the thing is went upside down. That's meant to be the bottom, but it's now saying it's the top. Well, that's not a problem. I can just take this plane now and that plane of the assembly and say constrain face the right way round, and this object now will just go side to side, which is not a problem because I'm just going to take this plane off the part and this plane off the assembly, say constrain, say apply, say cancel, and this now is in the center of the assembly properly. So if I was to look at the center point of the assembly, so I'll just press center point here, you'll see that the center point is in the middle, just appearing, and the center point of the component is in the same place. So they're sharing a common center. So essentially now we can start to assemble these other component parts. Now we can do this in multiple ways. We can also look at the planes of these parts here, and we could also get them to constrain to the planes of the various parts just here as well, which is a smart way of doing things where you can. So I'm going to say constrain this plane here to this plane of the block and say constrain. Just align that in place, so I'm happy we've got that just there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say the bottom surface of this shoe is touching the block just here. So I'm going to say that bottom surface touches just here. This component will now slide back and forward, but if I want to get it nice and centered, I can look at this center plane which I used to model the shoe, and again look at this center plane of the actual assembly and say constrain and say apply, and that there is now perfectly centered on the block. Now you might for your render want to move this component so it's not perfectly centered to make it more natural looking, but we're going to be happy with that for now. So I'm now going to constrain the center axis of the stud axle piece into the center axis of this, say apply, and this here will move up and down. It'll also rotate as well. So I'm going to look at the axes of this. So I'm going to take that axis there and that plane there and that plane there. Press constrain and apply that, and we'll get the handle perfectly 90 degrees. Now obviously when we're making a render, having things absolutely perfectly 90 degrees to each other can really sort of ruin the realism. But for making engineering drawings, we want to have things at nice 90 degree angles. So I'm going to take the last component here, which is this handle. And this is one of these ones where using planes really makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to take that center axis and that center axis and say apply. And usually this will sort of slide back and forward. Oops, it looks like I forgot to put a constraint on this just here. I can do that right now. Let's just go back to the sort of axle component already there. And let's look at that plane. Well, here's the issue. If I go constrain on that, we're going to get the two components intersecting, so that's not too great. So I'm going to take that and say there's an offset, say -50. Would that be too high? No, it's not enough. So let's make that an offset. We'll say -65. There we go. So I've taken those two planes, I've applied an offset, say apply, and that will stop this going up and down. So yeah, the handle, it's one of these things where annoyingly it would sort of slide in and out and in between, and when you're making your engineering drawing you might end up where this is just slightly off center and so on, and it can make your technical drawing, your engineering drawing, a little bit messy, which is certainly something we don't want. So again, by using the planes and looking at where the planes are, first of all I'm going to take this plane here and this plane here and make sure that they're perfectly constrained, and I'm going to take the horizontal plane, or sort of rather lateral sort of plane, and this one of the assembly, and I'm going to constrain those together by aligning them, and that there is the handle now perfectly centered with the actual V block itself, and that there is our 4 parts perfectly constrained so they're nicely locked, and this is ready now for an engineering drawing or taking to your preferred rendering software.